Welcome to Beyond the Voice. In this week's episode, I am joined by Audra Moore, host of Evil's Ancient Origins, a Christian perspective on alien life. We talk about childhood dreams, the influence of television, and the connection between aliens and religion. We also discuss the challenges of starting a podcast and share advice for aspiring podcasters. I hope you enjoy the episode. So tell me a little bit about your childhood. How was it like? Did you have any big dreams when you were little?
Let's see. As far as big dreams, when I was young, I wanted to be a singer, actually, more than anything else. I wanted to be a singer or a dancer. I think singing came first and then later dancing. Solid Gold Dancers. Do you remember the Solid Gold TV show? 1979 was the first airing of Solid Gold. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, and my parents were dysfunctional. I had two older siblings that were much older than I, and they were, disconnected. Our whole family was disconnected. I was the youngest of three in a family of people who just, like I said, disconnected.
Did you have any hobbies while you were growing up?
So I lived on a horse ranch, basically. We had horses and goats and chickens and dogs and cats. And I'd ride my horse. That was the main thing that I would do. Because we lived so far out, there wasn't a lot of neighbors. We didn't have neighbors. We didn't have any family in the area when I was young. So it was a solitary life, We had a dairy next door. We had, agricultural fields around our house. And so the most fun I could think of was going out to ride my horse. That was
And you never thought of maybe doing that professionally, like being a horseback rider?
I'm not sure what sort of profession. I mean, my brother tried to actually break a horse that was, just one that we had raised. To break means to be able to ride the horse, without getting bucked off, because that's not a natural thing. You have to, introduce yourself to the horse and make sure it's okay. You can ride it. And a lot of times it's not. So you fall off quite a few times before you actually get to stay on. And that process is called breaking the horse to ride it, right? It becomes green broke at first, and they just sort of tolerate you, but they don't like it, so they'll still buck you off. After a while, they become broken, right? You break their spirit so that you can ride it.
I've heard that before. Okay.
So we lived in the country. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere. I didn't have a lot of influence. My family, I dreamed of, I think it was television was my escape. And my first crush was Captain James T. Kirk. So Star Trek played a big influence on me. And Leonard Nimoy was he was the narrator for a TV show called In Search Of. And that was another favorite of mine. In Search Of was basically just a show about the wild things of the world, unexplained things. And it was fun. I really enjoyed, imagining what it would be like to live, on a spaceship and travel the galaxy and explore strange new worlds. So I think that's probably the introduction to why I am doing what I'm doing,
You basically use TV as a way to escape your reality.
Mm-hmm.
And did you use it as a creativity also, like in your day-to-day life?
Sure. When I did have friends that I would play with, I would end up pretending to be, characters from a TV series like Charlie's Angels. That was our favorite. So, I mean, strong women weren't a common thing on television in the 70s and 80s. So, really, all we had was something like, Charlie's Angels or Star Trek. Uhura, the character, she was, intelligent and strong, a strong woman, So, we had a few characters to look up to and try to emulate in our lives.
And when did you start um, learning about aliens?
So I think it was, in search of. They would commonly, introduce that subject. So I think from TV shows like that, the idea, and of course Star Trek, strange new worlds, new civilizations, unexplained beings from other galaxies, It's fun, fantastical.
And were you learning about that at the same time with your religion, like in your
Right.
Christianity?
So no, actually, that was all before I met Jesus. I ended up going to a church when I was about, I don't know, like 8 years old, probably. And I, because my home life was so disappointing, and I ended up trying to find, an answers or hope that things could be better than they were. That's when, luckily, I think internally I probably was always sort of connected to God, I mean, just believing that there had to be something bigger than all of this. So when I went to church, and we were invited from a friend of my sister's. She was in high school, and she met a friend who invited us to go to her church, and Tanya asked me to tag along, and so I went, and it was a Pentecostal church. So it was, the hellfire and brimstone. But at the same time, the people there were so kind and loving. A lot of old ladies, little old ladies in this little town, and um, they were kind. And because our family was so dysfunctional and detached, it was nice to have, people who just seemed to, unconditionally accept you and love you. It was fun. It was good. But then I experienced like the Holy Spirit, this experience where you, just the presence of God, something I don't know if you've ever experienced, but like God can meet you right where you are, and you feel this tingly sensation, and you just know that it's real, that it's God. It's outside of you, but it's in you, and it's hard to describe. But when you experience that, and it just changes your whole reality, it was good. It was the first good thing that really happened in my life. So I've clung to that. I knew that that was a real encounter, something I experienced firsthand. And so all this fantastical stuff about aliens and other worlds, I mean, how could it not necessarily be true if you know that this presence, that God is real, and that this presence can encounter you where you are. You can't see him. He's not here in present form, but he exists, and he touches you in such a way that you can't deny it. And that was like, how do we know that all these other things can't be true?
So starting the podcast, did you have any hesitations or challenges when you decided to start this podcast?
I think the biggest hesitation is, your insecurities, your own fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think it's a topic that people are interested in. So the inspiration for me to really get going on this has been the slow disclosure our government has been doing over the past, probably since 2017 or so is when it began. Luis Elizondo was trying to bring it out into the open. The New York Times had an article that discussed these whistleblowers who were government, either actually working for the government or contracted by the government, people who had experienced these encounters that they couldn't explain. And the government was keeping it all secret, hush hush. And so Luis Elizondo was actually investigating this topic of UFOs, or they call them UAPs now. And that was, when I saw that somebody's actually acknowledging that these things exist, government official people are bringing it out into the open. And that was the moment I thought, let's talk about it. Since it's a topic that the church doesn't address,
How do you think people are going to look at this when you start talking about aliens and the religion together?
Right. Okay, so I have my own theories about the whole thing. And, nobody knows what the truth is. I think that, the church is very much afraid that that anything they find, anything the government says, and if they acknowledge that there is some sort of other intelligence out there, that will discredit the idea that God exists. And so I think there's a lot of fear. But I look at it like, if your God is big enough to create the universe and create life, who are you to think that you're the only one? I mean, it's silly to imagine, oh, well, God created the heavens and the earth, and God created all the animals, and God created Adam and Eve. And, I think that's the narrative that everybody thinks of, and it's small-minded. There's other cultures that imagine that these sky beings came to the earth. There's the Anunnaki, there are, the Native Americans, and as well as Indians from India. I mean, there's across the whole globe, there are civilizations that express encounters with beings from other, from the sky. And in which case, that would signify that we're not alone out here in traveling on this globe in the middle of, space. So to imagine that's not possible, what you're actually doing is denying God's ability to do more than what you think he's capable of. I mean, who are you to tell God what he can or can't do? That's how I look at it.
And how do you think people are going to respond?
Right. Well, of course, the church is going to freak out. They're going to go, oh my gosh, you're a crazy person to imagine that. I mean, I've already been ostracized from church just by trying to say, hey, what about this crazy topic? What do you think? And I want to write a book about this. And just by me broaching the subject with people in authority at church, I've been like literally told that I'm not accepted in their crowd. I'm a rebel, though. I'm a rebel. I'm going to do what I want. I mean, who are you to tell me that fine. I don't want to be in a place where I'm not loved and accepted unconditionally. But I think that they are hindering their own ability to reach the masses, because if you truly want to proclaim the love of God and you refuse to accept people who think differently than you, I mean, that's not a way to teach people about Jesus, to teach people about God and his love for you. You need to be unconditionally loving, meeting people where they are, and telling them, well, I mean, if we don't have all the answers, God does. We'll figure it out as we go. And I think more and more, as our government is bringing up this topic and being more willing to investigate it, then there will be more and more people with the questions that I have, and the church is at some point going to have to address it.
I think eventually they will, but not anytime soon. I feel like they're very slow in addressing stuff.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah.
Do you see the podcasting world as a long-term career?
Sure. If that's where it goes. I'm writing a book about the topic, and I feel like the podcast is my opportunity to really dig in, have a reason to research and get words on the page, but also to start a conversation with others who are asking the same questions as I am, and see if we can't figure it out together. There's opportunity to really open our hearts and minds to see what this all means.
And what have you found in your research in the aliens and the church and the religion, I would say?
So, I think that the concern is the Bible itself. People people look at the Bible as this very basic book that that the guy that's standing on the stage at church has all the answers. So as long as I'm listening to what he has to say, then I'm going to get the answers, right? Mm-hmm. But what actually happens, the truth is, people who go to church don't read the book for themselves. And the guy standing on the stage has been told what to believe. So, if you have a theology degree, and a lot of pastors that are on stage don't even have that. But if you go to a formal college to get formal training in theology, then they're going to formulate how you perceive the scriptures, right? And there's no way that they're going to be able to teach you every single aspect of every book of every, of the Bible. They can't. There's no way in a class they're going to be able to cover every topic. I mean, when you were in college, how often did your professor approach every single page of that book when they were teaching you? There's no way. So, in my opinion, there's a lot of things that they don't address in theology school. They give you enough to make you dangerous, to make you believe that you know it all. But, in my experience reading the Bible front to back more than once, I've found, different things that make me question what the church is teaching, For instance, Genesis chapter 6 says, there were giants in the land in those days and also afterwards, where the sons of God came in unto the daughters of Eve, and, they had children, which were the Nephilim. The heroes of old, men of renown, right? And when you ask a priest, I was at my nephew's wedding, and there was a priest that had done, the ceremony. And so in the reception, he's sitting catty corner to me, and I took the opportunity. I said, "Sir, I have a question about the Bible. Do you mind if I ask?" And he said, "Sure, go ahead." So I asked him about Genesis chapter 6, that scripture that I just addressed. And he looked at me completely startled, and he had this blank look on his face, and he goes, "I don't know." I said, "What do you think about that?" And he goes, "I don't know." I said, "Well, I mean, heroes of old, men of renown. Doesn't that make you think of the Greek and Roman mythology?" And he was like, okay. He just kind of changed the subject, looked away. The conversation. I mean, everyone at the table was very uncomfortable. So this is what, and of course, it was blown off, and things went on, and I did not have anyone really conversate with me for the rest of the event. That was the end. So
that was the end of the party.
For me, anyway.
Wow.
This is the usual case. People don't want to imagine what that all means. And of course, the Bible does talk about giants, and so since our society is so like, oh my gosh, that's a fairy tale, right? Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. It's a story about a giant.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, our cultures are steeped with these mythologies. And where do these mythologies come from? When you look at every single civilization in the whole world has mythology surrounding giants. I mean, where did
Yeah,
that
that's
come
true.
from?
It's
Including the
true.
Bible. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, so if you believe the Bible, but you don't believe giants existed, then do you really believe in God? Hmm?
Mm. It's funny because now that I think about it, whenever you hear people talk about religion, their religion specifically, you always hear the same things. They
Mm-hmm.
never talk about um, like what you're talking about now. They never reference those scriptures. It's always the same type of scriptures,
Yeah.
and a lot of it has to do with like being good, you know,
Yeah.
not being a bad person, being a good person, and doing good onto others. But nobody ever really talks about the other scriptures that are in their Bibles.
Yeah. There are 66 books in the Bible, I think. I mean, that's a
Wow.
lot of books. And a lot of them are thick. I mean, the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, they're all quite lengthy, and it covers the whole gamut, beginning to end, all of, you know, ancient history. So, I mean, there are gaps, of course. But I look at other mythologies or ancient religions, ancient civilizations, and the Mesopotamians talked about the Anunnaki and the different aspects of their character, and you start to see these patterns where, oh my gosh, that kind of fits in with that one segment of the Bible where it says these things, and I mean, the whole picture is there if you want to look for it.
True. Just do your research.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, has there been anything that you've found in your research that maybe you were a little surprised about?
Hmm. I mean, I've been surprised the whole way through. That's how I got here. I mean, when you start to, because as a little girl, you're taught all these, like you say, the basics of treat your neighbor as you want to be treated, love your neighbor as you love yourself, be kind to others, obey your parents, the Ten Commandments, don't kill, don't bear false witness, or, all these different things. It's all very basic. And anyway, yes, I've been surprised. As I read the Bible, I was starting to realize these things. I had all these questions like, oh my goodness, if you want to go into it, here's the horror story, right? You meet God in the beginning where he creates Adam and Eve and the planets and the heavens and the earth and the animals, and then Adam and Eve, right? Got to get it in the right sequence. Goodness. Anyway, so you meet God and you think, wow, he created all this stuff. And then it goes on and he has struggles. Of course, Adam and Eve fall, but then there's the serpent and you're like, where did this serpent in the garden come from? Who's that? And how come they were able to deceive Adam and Eve? Oh my goodness. Like deception itself doesn't fit into God's plan. How could something go against the creator of everything? What does that look like? And then you learn, about the devil or Satan, which is, a term that is the adversary when you look at it in the Hebrew. So it's somebody who's against God and against his creation. And so you see a bigger picture there. And then you start to understand, okay, so the whole book is about the difference between good and evil and our chance to overcome the evil that has, brought us away from a personal intimacy with God. And the whole thing starts to open up, and as you read on, there are these questions you have, why are these beings against God? How did that happen? I mean, gosh, when you hear about how amazing heaven would have been, and how just, if you can see the creative beauty of God, you can imagine how amazing a perfect world would be, which would be how we describe heaven, right? So why would anybody turn against that? That's horrible. And then you start to understand, human nature, and the nature of personal will, right? Giving us the freedom to choose. And God gave that to the angels as well. And so the surprising thing is when you start to recognize what's not addressed in the church, right? The first thing that opened my eyes to see that they weren't teaching everything was this person in the Bible called Enoch, okay? Now, Enoch is mentioned in the Old Testament, like in this crazy obscure position where the Old Testament has this habit of going through lineage, okay? And that in and of itself is an important aspect, right? The fact that God says, well, there was this guy and he had a wife and they had this child, right? So when he was so many years old, he had a kid, and that kid lived, he lived so many years after that, and then he died. And then this child, so there are these gaps in the story from creation. You learn about Adam and Eve, but then there's this gap where then you learn about Noah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in order to fill that gap, they go through the lineage. So and so begat so and so begat so and so begat so and so, and finally there was Noah, right? So there's a lot of generations. And not only are there, say when you think generations, it's like 40, 60 years, right? But really, they lived hundreds of years back then. So it's even longer, a longer period of time from generation to generation. So so the lineage is showing you the amount of time that has passed, right? Now it's so boring to read that. Everybody skips over that part. They go, oh my gosh, so-and-so begat so-and-so, they had a kid, and then, and it's so hard to focus on that whole part. But if you read it all the way through, you realize it says, and, so-and-so begat Enoch, and Enoch was a friend of God. It breaks the whole cycle of just data and says, oh, but this guy, he was special, right? He had this great relationship with God, and he was so close to God that suddenly God took him. He didn't die. He just disappeared one day and lived with God, right? And then it goes on as if that was no big deal. No, was, like Enoch's son was, I don't remember, so-and-so, and then Methuselah, and then Noah, right? So he's close to the end there. But when you realize that they all lived for hundreds of years, several of them, like Enoch was alive the same time as Adam and Eve were alive, because Adam and Eve lived for hundreds of years. So Enoch was considered a chronicler, but you don't find this out until later, right? So fast forward, no one mentions Enoch again. There's another Enoch that is mentioned, and that's the child of Cain. And we're not talking about that Enoch. So there's two Enochs. But fast forward to like Hebrews or somewhere, and I don't have it in front of me. I should have had it written out. But they mention Enoch, right? And they go, oh, like Enoch said, so-and-so, this and that, right? And they quote something that Enoch said. So how is it that some writer of the New Testament is quoting something that Enoch said when the Old Testament of our Bible shows absolutely nothing? Enoch doesn't say anything. It just mentions him in passing. So at that point, I realized I was hugely surprised that something was missing from the Bible, that there's a whole book out there called the Book of Enoch. And it freaking talks about, guess what it talks about? Talks about the fallen angels and how they approached Enoch. And it talks about the Nephilim and how angels, the sons of God, Genesis chapter 6, the sons of God had sex with women, and their offspring were the Nephilim, right? These heroes of old, men of renown, giants. And so this is, this was the surprise for me. At that point, I was like, okay, I need to read the Bible again, because wow, that like changes everything. So when you read the Bible again with that perspective in mind, oh my gosh, everything that you read, you go, I didn't even look at it from that perspective. There is so much that opens up to you. And okay, here comes the conspiracy theorist in me. You want to hear this?
Yeah. Go for it.
So this is where I say, okay, somebody removed it. Somebody along the way said, okay, this is not, this is uncomfortable. This topic is something that we don't feel comfortable addressing, right? Or was it something nefarious? Was it somebody who took charge of like the theological schools and said, let's make it a little harder for them to figure this thing out. Let's remove this book that talks about fallen angels having sex with women and the offspring being so evil that God had to wipe them all out, So that was the part that was really concerning. That's what got me searching, was when you see in the Old Testament, the idea of Noah, the flood, that God would wipe out every inhabitant of the earth, animals, everything. I mean, you look at that and go, okay, how is that God loving and caring and kind when he only saves like a handful of people, literally 6 people? Well,
that's true.
8 people, Noah and his wife, plus his 3 sons and their wives. So 8 people, the whole world God wiped out and saved 8 people. Why? But Genesis chapter 6 is the reason, because these fallen angels, the offspring, the Nephilim, were evil. They were so bad. The giants. So when you read the book of Enoch, you find out that these giants were so bad. Like first of all, they were so ravenous that they would eat all of the food that the people produced, right? So the people are starving and they're just doing everything they can to feed these giants so that the giants don't kill them, right? So speaking of Mesopotamia, when you look at these reliefs that this, gosh, I can't remember the name of the guy, but there's a very famous, like carved stone relief of this guy sitting in his chair, and he's massive. And there are these little people that are like coming up to this massive guy, and they're bringing these like trays of food to this guy that's sitting, he's got like this feathered skirt on or something. It's really strange looking. And now that I know, the giants and how the story of the giants and how the people would feed them as much as they could, to keep them from killing them, pretty soon what happened was they ran out of food to feed them, and the giants would eat the people. And so this is in the book of Enoch, where God had to step in and go, okay, the blood of the people is crying out for justice. And that's when he said, okay, we're going to have to do something about this. And it describes in the book of Enoch God's plan. He said, go tell Enoch that a flood is coming. Enoch knew in advance, because Noah knew in advance. Enoch came and told Noah. God told Enoch, because here Enoch has this relationship with God. He'd walk with God and talk with God like an intimacy, And so God told Enoch to go tell Noah that the flood was coming. And that's the missing piece.
That's interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of information.
Yeah, it is. That's the surprise, right? When you find out that there's stuff missing from the Bible. I really think that there's a dark force trying to obfuscate our image of God. I mean, if the serpent was in the garden, and we know that this is the realm, the Bible says that this is the kingdom of evil that we're in, that he is the prince of the power of the air, the devil is. So when you hear the prince of the power of the air, what does that make you think of? UFOs. What? Yeah, I mean,
I didn't think about
yeah. So if he had his tentacles in the people way back then, getting them kicked out of the garden, he's had his tentacles in the people all along. The devil is really, crap.
Well, basically the devil would be all the negative, the bad stuff that happens, right?
Yeah, right. So it says that so the whole plan of the devil was to usurp God's power. He was jealous of God's authority and glory and beauty. So the story goes that God created Lucifer was his name, right? The angel. He was created with all the splendor and glory. He's the most beautiful of all the angels, and he was placed in this position of worship. He was like the worship leader, right? So he's beautiful and he's got all this attention of all the other angels. He would lead the angels in worshiping God, right? But he felt like he was better than God. So why are they worshiping God? They need to be worshiping me. That was where he goes wrong. And at that point, there was a third of the angels that went with him when he was expelled from heaven. So, I mean, if there's a third of the angels that were in heaven and had access to all the heavenly technology and knowledge and wisdom and, well, not all of it, because the book of Enoch actually says that God goes, okay, you think you know it all, you guys, the angels that were, cast out of heaven, because that was the whole point. The angels end up going back to Enoch and says, okay, you've got this great relationship with God. We're having trouble with our offspring. Our Nephilim children are like, yes, I know that they're doing bad, but I need you to go talk to God and tell him that, find if there's a way that he'll save our children, that he'll help us, not lose our progeny. And God says, "Oh my gosh, you guys, look at the torment you're creating on the earth. I can't prevent them from dying. They have to be eliminated. This is not going to go on. Look at the people. My creation is suffering. I can't just let your children survive at the expense of my creation. No, that's evil. I, as a just God, can't allow that." So God ends up telling them they have 500 years to live. That's it. 500 years.
Wow.
And so the Nephilim lived for, that amount of time. And at that point, I think that's when the flood came. I think that was the time frame. God, you've got 500 years, then I'm wiping them out, right?
Well, what do you think your younger self would be most surprised to learn about who you are today?
Oh boy. Gee, that's a tough one. Probably how, I don't know if I'd be surprised at my independence because I'm an independent thinker. So the idea that I'm just going for it. I think I've always been very sort of shy and a little insecure. So the idea that I'm really going for it, like taking the step, making the podcast,
and the book,
writing the book. Yeah, writing the book. I think that would be a surprise for sure. Yeah.
Definitely. What's something that you've unlearned as you've grown older?
Unlearned?
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy. Unlearned. How about unlearning? I'm in the process of unlearning dependency on
Okay.
others. I'm I'm learning to become independent and more putting more stock in my own understanding of things. It's easy to imagine that everybody else has the answers, and it's hard when you've been told your whole life that, oh, you can't do that, or you're not smart, or what are you thinking, right? It's hard to unlearn that. So trying to recognize that, you know, I am capable. I am capable of learning. I'm capable of, expressing things in a way that maybe other people don't perceive it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
How do you handle self-doubt or imposter syndrome in this
Ooh,
podcasting world?
ouch. Okay. I mean, I still think I'm an imposter every day. At what point do you stop being an imposter? It's a good question. Oh my goodness. Um, Self-doubt. So, it goes back to the whole higher power. Like, I think that I'm unique for a reason. I look at things from a unique perspective because God created me that way. And the way that the world is right now, and more people are starting to see, it's coming out into the open. And I feel like it's possible things could go the wrong way if we're not careful. So God created me to do this right now. So that's how I'm dealing with imposter syndrome, just hoping that God's going to be there for me to get through it.
Well, I feel like with your podcast, I feel like you have to have an open mind,
Right.
and unfortunately, a lot of people who are religious, they're not open-minded.
Yeah.
But I still think that you'll find success in your podcast.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hope so.
If you could give one piece of advice to new podcasters, what would it be?
I think it's just don't give up. If you believe in the topic and you have a passion for it, just keep going and find others that are on the same track. You know what I mean? I think that's a key, supporting each other. Because I mean, having to do it on your own is that was something I realized a few years back. I worked in production at my church, and I had opportunities to work on set for a couple of independent things that were not church related, but it was through the people at church that I was able to be on set. And it was very interesting to just recognize how many people are involved in putting on a production, and up until that point, I was like, so overwhelmed by the process, thinking, I want to make a movie someday. I want to write a story and make it happen in picture form, and but I felt so overwhelmed. How am I ever going to create the story and then, make it happen? But when you get on set and recognize, that you can't do it alone, that you have to rely on others. I mean, I feel like that's going to translate for podcasting as well. You just do as much as you can for as long as you can, but eventually you're going to need to create a team. It's going to have to be a team effort. Looking forward to the day when I have a team.
Right? Because doing this solo, it's a lot of work.
It
doing
is.
everything by
It
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah,
But that's how you learn. So,
for sure.
yeah.
For sure.
All right. Well, thank you for being on today's show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of
I
course.
appreciate it.
I wish you all the success on your podcast and your book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. To success as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
That's a wrap for today's episode. A huge thank you to Audra Moore for joining me and sharing her insights. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. You can also follow on YouTube, Instagram, and X. Thank you for listening.